Washington Journal continues.
And welcome back. And Carl Takei is with us now. He's the National Prison Project Staff Attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union, better known to you as the ACLU. And he's with us to discuss the recent Justice Department decision to reverse course in an Obama administration plan to phase out the use of private prisons. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And set the scene for us. Why did the Trump administration make this change, and substantively, what is it regarding the use of private prisons?
Well, it's a total reversal from what the Obama administration did. In August 2016, the Obama administration announced that they were going to phase out the use of private prisons after a damning Department of Justice Office of Inspector General report finding that private prisons performed worse than regular federal prisons, and they couldn't find any evidence of cost savings. And the findings were terrible. I have to emphasize that. They found that there were more lockdowns, 9 times more lockdowns, excessive use of solitary confinement, poor medical care. In one case, there was a private prison that went without a full-time doctor for 8 months, apparently because it saved them more money to do that, even paying the fines that they were for that understaffing, than to actually pay the doctor. So that's where the Obama administration directive came from. And then when Attorney General Sessions was confirmed, shortly thereafter, he announced that he was reversing the Obama administration's directive. It's not based on any new information. It's based on the ideology of the Trump administration.
In fact, we have a full screen of that statement. It says, "I hereby rescind the memorandum dated August 18th, 2016, sent to you by former Deputy Attorney General Sally Q. Yates, entitled Reducing Our Use of Private Prisons. The memorandum changed longstanding policy and practice and impaired the Bureau's ability to meet the future needs of the federal corrections system. Therefore, I direct the Bureau to return to its previous approach." What are your thoughts on that argument, and then the suggestion here that the future needs of the federal correction system won't be met, suggesting that there will be more enforcement?
Right. So the future needs part of that is the key, because the Obama administration directive was based on, one, the findings from the Inspector General finding that the conditions were terrible in private prisons, and two, the determination that because federal prison populations had been falling for years and they expected them to continue falling, that they would be able to do this just by slowly starting to move people from private prisons into regular federal prisons, and it wouldn't cause overcrowding. If the Sessions Justice Department is planning on putting a lot more people in prison, then that imperils that assumption.
Carl Takei is our guest, and we're talking about the federal government's use of private prisons. If you have experience with the private prison system, we're asking you to call 202-748-8003. Now, Carl, where did the Obama administration plan to put the 20,000 plus prisoners who were in the private system?
Well, again, this is all premised on the idea that federal prison populations would continue falling as they have been. Contrary to some of the statements from Attorney General Sessions, crime is at an all-time historic low across the country and has been for the past several years. So, for example, in 2013, the federal prison population was more than 220,000 people. Today, it's less than 190,000. And so the idea behind the Obama administration directive was that as the prison population continued to fall, they could just begin shutting these prisons down.
And the Department of Homeland Security, through the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, also uses the private prison system. Explain that for us.
Yeah, Immigration and Customs Enforcement is heavily dependent on private prisons, more so than the Justice Department. They, almost 3/4 of the people who are in the custody of Immigration and Customs Enforcement are held in facilities run by private prison companies. And this is something that under the Obama administration, the Department of Homeland Security's Advisory Council looked at. And actually, there was a pretty contentious vote, but in the end, the Advisory Council in December advised the department to begin a measured but deliberate phase out of its reliance on private prisons, much in the same way as the Justice Department. Of course, that no longer applies to this administration.
Yeah, and if someone is undocumented, is picked up by ICE, and then is then put in one of the facilities operated by one of these private prison corporations, what kind of setting do they encounter once they're in that facility?
It is essentially indistinguishable from a prison or jail. All of the immigration system runs on a model where, for the company, it doesn't really matter for them who is occupying their prison beds. It could be somebody who's there serving a sentence. It could be somebody who's there waiting for their immigration case to be adjudicated. But either way, they're staffed by the same guards, the same companies, with the same physical layouts inside.
And how is the determination made based on, how will the system determine whether or not someone goes to a federal prison or a private prison?
It depends on whether you're talking about the Justice Department or ICE. For the Justice Department, they've actually set up a sort of separate shadow system where in the 90s, the Justice Department determined that they would begin sending non-US citizens to private prisons and US citizens to regular federal prisons. The reasoning behind that was that non-US citizens who have committed federal crimes can be expected to be deported after the end of their sentence. And so the Bureau of Prisons felt that even if the private prison failed to rehabilitate the person at all, it wouldn't matter for US communities in the end because the person would be deported.
Yeah. Carl Takei is our guest this morning, and we're taking your calls about private prisons. The number to call is 202-748-8003. And we have some more information here that we can refer to. It's about the federal contracts with the private prison system. The Bureau of Prisons, as you said, currently has contracts with 12 private prisons. As of December 2015, contract prisons housed roughly 22,000 people, about 12% of the Bureau of Prisons' total inmate population, and the annual expenditures on contract prisons was $639 million in fiscal year 2014. So this is big business, and we've seen the stock prices of these major corporations rally in the last few months. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I listened to both of the quarterly earnings reports for Corrections Corporation America, which actually just rebranded itself to CoreCivic to obscure its connection to caging human beings, and Geo Group. These are publicly traded companies. Both of them are expecting to make about $2 billion a year or more in 2017. And their stock prices have shot up, first with the election of Donald Trump as president, then with the announcements of various immigration policies from the administration, and then with the Sessions announcement that he was rescinding the prior phase out.
And then candidate Trump made the point that private prisons tend to work better than the public ones. What do you make of that argument?
There's no evidence behind it, much like many of the other things that candidate Trump said. What he said seemed to be from a general position of liking privatization. But prison privatization actually is especially fraught even within the category of privatizing government services. Oliver Hart, who won the 2016 Nobel Prize in Economics, said that private prisons are one of the worst areas to try and privatize for a number of reasons. One of those is that it's not a competitive environment. CCA actually tells its shareholders that they're a good investment because there are very high barriers to entry and there are very few competitors in this space.
Okay, let's go to the phones. We have Stefan calling in from Rincon, Puerto Rico on the Independent line. Good morning.
Yes, hello. My name is Stefan Omar, and I'm calling from Rincon, Puerto Rico. And thank you for accepting my call. I have relatives and friends who have been incarcerated, and I know in the States and here, and so many of the prisons are in deplorable conditions. When you talk about private prisons, if you go out to Rikers Island in New York, and I did volunteer work with Father Lawrence E. Lucas, who's very well known in the prison system out at Rikers Island. And if you see the deplorable conditions, I remember when I was living in New York, we used to have a free prison program where we could visit relatives and friends. The governor cut that off where we couldn't even go to visit our loved ones in the prisons. And my question to you, sir, is this. I know that Wall Street, from what I understand, is making billions and billions and billions of dollars, and it's quite unfortunate that the majority of the people that I visited in prison of Black and Latino backgrounds. and the exploitation. And why is it that when we have these programs where we could get free visits, we could bring our children and grandchildren to these prisons, that the governor and they cut these programs off, and when we do go to visit our loved ones, many times we cannot even go to visit them because they are in solitary confinement. And solitary confinement, as you know, by the Geneva Accords, is considered unjustable punishment. I'll hang up and listen to your response, and thank you, C-SPAN, for taking my call. And Puerto Rico is so beautiful. I hope you can come and visit us sometime on our beaches.
All right, thank you, Stefan. Now we have Norm calling in from Cleveland, Ohio. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I don't understand the big controversy here with private versus the federal prison system or even state prison system. I have had friends of mine who had served in both in private, and I can tell you this much: I go to a federal prison to visit them, and I can tell you that they dress better than I do with all of the stuff that they have available to them. And as far as who's making what money, what matter does it make? If they're in there to do time, let them do their time and get out. I don't understand the controversy. And from your call from Puerto Rico, what billions of dollars are we talking about? You just put a price there of $368 million, or I'm sorry, $648 million that we spend on the private prisons. Thank you.
Care to weigh in there?
Okay. Well, for the caller who talked about visiting friends and family in Rikers, I think that's incredibly important because the fact that private prisons are terrible and have an inhumane business model doesn't exonerate public prisons. Rikers has a long-standing problem with a culture of violence among the staff, and that has been an ongoing issue for years. As for the question of why we should care about who is making money off of prisons, it's important because if you have a public prison, then public money is going to pay public employees, and there's nobody who's making a profit off of that. There are problems, but none of the problems are caused by somebody funneling off money in order to create profits for shareholders in the way that exists for private prisons. This is something that has deep historical resonances. If you look at the contracts for private prisons, it for example, says for a 1,500-bed prison that the government will deliver 1,500 units to the prison. Those units are human beings.
All right, we're talking with Carl Takei about the private prison system. We are taking your calls, as we always do. Democrats, please call 202-748-8000. The line for Republicans is 202-748-8001. And the line for independents is 202-748-8002. And of course, if you have personal experience with the system, you should also feel free to call in as well. Let's go now to Matthew calling in from Stockton, California. He has experience with the system. What is that experience, Matthew?
It's a correctional facility teacher at San Joaquin County prison facility. And, I think what it really comes down to is the education system and, honestly, a mental health. And we're not really receiving through the government what we should be receiving. It's a lot harder when the mental health was shut down a long time ago. And then from now working as a prison correctional officer / teacher, trying to get them their GEDs. And it's really a dangerous job / a job that you really learn to love. And so it's a job that really I've seen a lot of guards that come onto the job not trained well to de-escalate the violence and whatnot. So it's almost like we need a psychiatrist type training for officers and guards and whatnot, and also to get them out of the incarceration and rehabilitated in general.
Anything to add there?
Yeah, I think he raises some important points about community mental health. We have systematically underinvested in providing mental health services to people who need them. And there are a lot of people who end up in the criminal justice system because of mental health issues. The other point is that it is really important to have people who are working on mental health and education for people who are inside the system, because the vast majority of people who are in prison today are going to return to our communities. And we want them to return in a condition where they can lead full lives and not to have them broken inside prison.
Let's go now to Joe, calling in from Rego Park, New York. Good morning, Joe.
Hi, good morning, C-SPAN America and all ships at sea. I spent over 30 years in the criminal justice system, and back in the 90s came judges, got mandatory minimums imposed on them, and that, hand in glove with the private prisons, is how this became an operation without a guarantee of prisoners. The corporations who fund these private prisons aren't guaranteed a return on their investment. So it all links together, the criminal justice system and the prisons, because the prisons can't operate without the criminal justice system, and the judges that impose sentences on defendants. We all know that America incarcerates far too many people, and the reason for it is all about money. It's disgusting, but it's true. I spent over 30 years in the criminal justice system, and I've spoken with many judges over the years who got their hands tied by what's called mandatory minimums. And we realized that the reason for that is to keep these prisons populated. And, of course, with the privatization of prisons, that reduces the federal government or the public government's involvement in prisons, lessens their cost. And so in the end, as it is with a lot of things, it really is all about money. And it's awful because you're incarcerating so many people that shouldn't be incarcerated for the amount of time for the offenses committed, but it's about the money and ensuring that these corporations see return on their investment. Thank you.
Yeah. I think the caller raises a really important point about people being unnecessarily incarcerated. The reason why we are in the midst of a mass incarceration epidemic is that over the last couple of decades, we have continuously ratcheted up the number of people who enter prison and the amount of time that they spend in prison. That's one of the things that we're especially concerned about with the priorities of this Justice Department.
All right, we have Constance on the line. She's calling from Warfield, Virginia. She's a Democrat and has experience with the system. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I agree totally with the person who just spoke before me. We have to, when you consider where all the jobs are, corporations that have these private prisons, they have the prisoners working for like 35 cents an hour, and that's the top salary. So let's face it, $7.25 an hour versus 35 cents an hour for a prisoner.
Okay.
Yeah. Labor exploitation is a major issue. And actually, just this past week, there was a federal court case in Colorado that won class certification challenging the use of detainee labor in immigration detention. There's a private prison company there at Geo Group that uses ICE detainees to basically run the facility. They clean it, they maintain it, and they're paid $1 a day for it. And if they don't work, they're thrown in solitary confinement, according to the lawsuit.
We have Amy on the line calling in from Ingram, Texas. She's on the independent line. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning. I read an article, I believe, in The Intercept not too long ago, and it has really started bothering me. It's not just the prison companies, it's the offshoots from the different things that are offered. Calls from prisoners to their families and back and forth are just outrageously expensive. And I was reading about pilot programs where in order to make money, they want to start, instead of using physical visits or face-to-face visits, they want to start using this sort of video conferencing, video visit sort of thing, which the inmates and their families would pay for. And that is just, to me, a symbol of one of the worst things about privatizing something like that. I don't think anyone should be able to control another person's body unless you are absolutely government, state, county, not just some basically bounty hunter type person. That's what I want to know about, was the money made from not just the prison, but the ancillary things. Thank you.
Yeah, there are a whole range of companies that make money off of prisoners and their families. This includes phone companies that are specific to prisons and jails, like the caller said. It includes financial services that cater only to prisoners and their families, and that because of monopoly contracts are the only choice for sending money to a family member who's inside. It even extends to people who are released from jail that, now there are a lot of jails that instead of getting your money back in your wallet, they put it onto what's called a release card, which is a debit card, and it's got fees to maintain it each month, it's got fees to close the account, and it's got fees to withdraw money from the account.
All right, Mindy's with us. She's calling in from St. Paul. She's on the Republican line. What's on your mind?
Okay, I hope this wasn't addressed already, but okay, you've got the public and the privatized. Why don't they take where they're taking and sending back the immigrants? Why don't they take the prisoners and have them do their jobs and we pay them to pay for their own care and save the whole United States money?
The system that we have in the United States today actually comes from the loophole in the 13th Amendment. It bans slavery except for slavery and indentured servitude that is part of the sentence for a crime. And that is why across the country there is an enormous labor force of prisoners who, they maintain the prisons where they live for no pay or very little pay, and that's unjust.
And we have a tweet here from someone using the handle Barkway. This person writes, private prisons pay guards less money than other prisons and hire less qualified people with little training in that capacity. Let's go back to the phones now to, we have Ed calling in from Detroit, Michigan on the independent line. Good morning.
Carl, God bless you, my friend, for your honesty and pulling the curtain back on the wizard, because there is a disproportionate number of young black men who are incarcerated, and the recidivism rate is just absolutely abysmal. And these conditions have to stop. And Shawshank Redemption is a fairy tale compared to the actual conditions inside prisons. And it costs the same here in Michigan. It costs $5 million plus per day to incarcerate young black men who have gone to prison for selling an herb, for example. And that's my bias, I admit. But God bless you for speaking out, and let us reduce the recidivism rate. Let us give people a trade inside so that they have a fighting chance when they do hit the street to make an actual living and reincorporate themselves into society. And I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you.
Let's go now to Ronald calling in from Toledo, Ohio on the Democratic line. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Great, thanks. What's on your mind?
I would just like to reiterate what the gentleman just was talking about before me. We have a lot of young black men in prison that are there for things that should not technically would be a probational type of thing. I'm talking about, I have experience on both sides. I've had a son who's been incarcerated, and I have a daughter who actually works at a prison. So she's always telling me about the people that's there that really don't need to be there. There's so many mentally ill people who do not need to be in prison. They need to be somewhere else. There are so many young, we're not educating our young men. Black young men are not going to high school. They're definitely not going to college like black females are going. We're spending too much money on the wrong end. We need to be spending more money on education, 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 education. We have cities like Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, Chicago. The inner cities have been suffering for over 3 to 4 decades. No one seems to want to invest in it, but they seem to want to invest in these private prisons. On Stickney Avenue in Toledo, you can turn left and go to the Jeep and get a job. If you turn right, you go to a private prison. Number one, it's non-union. They don't treat their prison, they don't treat their population with any respect or any due diligence under the Constitution. This must stop, this must stop, this needs to stop immediately, and I'll take my answer.
Yeah, what's your response to those last two calls?
Yeah, I think it points to the larger issue, which is that we are incarcerating far too many people in this country. Rather than incarcerating people, we should be providing services. We should be investing in what are called $1 million blocks, where people have been taken away from their communities to be sent to prison. And it costs $1 million a year to remove these people from their communities. Why shouldn't we be actually investing in the communities and putting this money to a better use than in the coffers of these companies?
Okay. And our final call for this segment is from Kevin, calling in from Albuquerque, New Mexico on the Democratic line. Good morning.
Good morning. We should ban for-profit prisons and for-profit colleges. Both take advantage of the people there who have no voice, the inmates and the students. We should ban for-profit colleges and for-profit prisons. Bye.
Okay. Care to have the final word here?
Yeah, I think this is both these last three callers. It really points to the problem with the way that the system works right now. Our justice system should not be running on a profit motive, and yet this administration is turning back toward private prisons and toward putting more people in prison without good reasons, and all of that is very alarming.
Carl Takei with the ACLU, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Appreciate it.